Hello, my name is Diane, and I read 7 Christmas romances. Hate it. Still don't think romance is for me. A couple weeks ago, I read a bunch of Christmas fiction books. Then I read a week's worth of Christmas mysteries, and then this week I read another week's worth of Christmas romances. While I'm not a big holiday reader, I'm really not a big romance reader. It's probably my least favorite genre. It's not something I gravitate towards, but in this experiment of trying out holiday reads and some genres that I don't typically gravitate towards, I thought it'd be fun to throw in romance and see if maybe there's something within that genre that works for me. And I think it's fair to say that there really isn't a whole lot there for me. While some of these were fun and it's nice to switch it up once in a while, I think I really confirmed that I'm not a big romance reader. It's not what I like at the center of the story. My favorite of the 7 romances I read is not a very happy story. I think you'll see that when I tell you my favorite of the ones that I read. There is one that stands out, and it is not a happily ever after. The first Christmas romance I read was The Christmas Wedding Guest by Susan Mallory. This follows 2 sisters who return to their hometown for their parents' vow renewal just before Christmas. One of the sisters reunites with her high school boyfriend and they start getting to know each other once again. The other sister runs their grandmother's inn that she has now inherited. She's also a teacher during the day, and she's decided she's given up looking for the right man. She just wants to be a mother, so she's gone ahead and gotten pregnant by herself just so she can fulfill that without waiting for the right guy to come along and maybe make that happen for her. And she meets a musician who is staying at the inn that she owns. Overall, I liked this story. I really liked one of the sisters' halves more than the other one. I cared a lot more about the sister who's working 2 jobs and having a baby and just living her life the way she wants to, much more than the second chance romance trope isn't really very appealing to me. And there's just a lot of people pining over each other but never really doing anything about it or talking about it. It made both of the romances feel a little bit juvenile when all of these characters are supposed to be in their 30s. And I think having the 2 romances in one book together just made it feel a little too long, especially where I cared a lot more about one half of the story than the other half. I think maybe if you like both of the sisters, this would be a great read. There's a little something for everyone. Romance-wise, maybe not for everyone if you don't like romance like me, but I thought this was pretty good for what it was. If not a little too long, but you're fully developing 4 characters and 2 relationships. So the next romance I read is 12 Days of Christmas by Debbie Maycomber. This follows a woman whose work is sort of having a competition. Everyone has to start a blog, and whoever can build it up the most and get the most attention on their blog gets something. I actually don't remember what they get. And she has gotten a little attention on hers, but not very much, not enough that she thinks she has a shot at winning. And she has this grumpy neighbor who just seems very unpleasant. She doesn't like him. He really irritates her, and she decides she's gonna change her blog and spend 12 days just being incredibly kind to this guy and either winning him over or just driving him crazy, which in her mind is a little bit of a victory anyway, because right now he drives her crazy with his grumpiness. So she spends the next 12 days just doing random, overly nice things for him. And of course, it's a Christmas romance. They start falling for each other. While I definitely didn't love this one, I did like it. I think a lot of romances seem to have sort of a whirlwind romance. They go through a lot of ups and downs in a matter of a week, sometimes in other books less time, and this was no exception to that. These characters really go through the full range of a relationship in a very short amount of time. It felt very How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, where they start off just kind of driving each other crazy, and then they fall madly in love with each other in 10 days, in this case 12 days. And I just think that's a little silly, but as kind of a sillier, lighthearted read, I do definitely prefer the enemies to lovers much more than like second chance romance, and insta love is just the worst. So overall, this was one of my top romances that I read this week. I definitely prefer that the grumpy sunshine, the enemies to lovers type of trope much more than fluffier insta love or second chance romance friends to lovers are just a little too sweet, and like want there to be something else in the romance where either they hate each other or they're competing with each other or something, some other tension other than just sexual tension. I need something else. Then I read Starry Night, also by Debbie May Convert, and this follows a journalist, which I've noticed there's a lot of journalists in Christmas books. I don't really know what that's about, but there's a few of them that I've read this month. This follows a journalist who basically writes fluffy lifestyle pieces, and she really wants to write something more meaningful, and her boss more or less tells her if she can get an interview with this reclusive author and get it published, then she can basically have the pick of whatever she wants to write after that. She goes and sets out to find him. He lives in a remote place in Alaska. She winds up finding him, gets herself there, and just shows up on his doorstep. She's, I believe, only there for one night. Gets to know him. They develop feelings for each other so fast. And then she goes home with the intention of writing her piece. And then it's just a little bit of a ridiculous roller coaster relationship where she wants to respect him by not writing the interview, and then he feels bad that he's interfered with her career by telling her not to write the interview, so now he wants her to write the interview. And after literally just showing up on some guy's doorstep and having to stay there for the night, because otherwise she would just stay outside and freeze, and he's not a total monster. Now they've just fallen in love with each other, and that to me is just so silly. It's really not a healthy relationship, but whatever. This one was fine. I don't know. Then I read The Christmas Train by David Baldacci. This is a very popular book. I've never heard of it until I started doing this, but there's also a movie based off of it, and it follows this man who I think is also a journalist. And he has to take a train from the East Coast to the West Coast, and he's trying to get home in time for Christmas, but he's sort of at the mercy of the train schedule, which he doesn't seem to understand how train travel works. So while he's on this long train journey, he gets to know some of the other people that are on board. You find out that his ex-girlfriend is also on board, and the weather starts becoming a problem. All of these things start coming up. It's pretty ridiculous. I wasn't super invested in it. This is another case of I didn't really like the main character that much, so I didn't really care about him. And since the whole thing is just about him existing on this train, I wasn't really invested in the story. The romance that develops felt pretty obvious, and then the ending felt kind of ridiculous, the way they explain everything that happened. So probably just my reading preference, because this does seem to be a very popular Christmas story, but not my favorite Christmas story that I read this month. Then I read The Christmas Wedding by James Patterson and Richard DeLallo. I almost liked this. This follows 4 adult siblings who return home because their mom has told them she's getting married, but no one has any idea who she's marrying. And the premise is just so absurd. This woman has had multiple proposals from the men in her life. She's widowed, so she's never really planned on marrying anyone else, and now she's decided she's going to say yes to one of these men. She's going to have a wedding, but even the men don't know who she's going to decide to marry. It's just kind of day of, she's going to be like, you're the one, and then they're going to get married, and everybody seems cool with that, and I just think that that's ridiculous. But anyway, the adult children all have their own personal dramas, and I liked that part of the story, learning about them and the family kind of coming together to support each other through whatever things they're going through. It read very sort of Parenthood or Packed to the Rafters, if you're familiar with either of those shows. All these adult children kind of coming home and finding out what's going on in each other's lives, not always good things going on, and just supporting each other and being there for each other. So I liked the children's part of the story where the families come together and they're dealing with all these things, but the romance part of it with the ridiculous wedding and the multiple proposals, and you find out the morning of the wedding who she's actually going to marry, wasn't really into that. Then I read One Snowy Night by Jill Shalvis. This was the one I was the most nervous about because based on the summary and especially the book cover, I thought this was going to be really spicy, and I'm not ready for that, but I thought I'd throw it in the mix. Maybe it would be fine. This was not nearly as spicy as I thought it would be. It was pretty tame, actually. It's about this girl who needs to get home to her family, who she has a pretty rocky relationship with. She needs to get home in time for Christmas morning, and the only way that she can get there is through this guy who she has a history with, and they don't really get along, and he drives her with his dog in his pickup truck. They end up getting stuck in a snowstorm, and then throughout the story you start learning about their past with each other. There's obviously a lot of sexual tension. They do spend the night together, not surprisingly, but it's not described really at all. Very low spice level, but still too spicy for me. I did love the dog though. The dog made it a little better. Some people complain that there was too much dog in the reviews of this, but I guess if you like romance, maybe too much dog. If you don't like romance, like me, needed more dog. And the final romance I read this week is Always in December by Emily Stone. This was my favorite read of the week, and I think it really solidifies the fact that happy, light romances are not for me. This follows our main character, Josie, who has lost her parents when she was young, and now every Christmas she just writes them a letter telling them that she misses them and she loves them. It's not a devastating grief at this point in her life, but it is something that she carries with her all of the time, especially this time of year. And she literally bumps into this boy named Max, and they end up spending a few days together and getting to know each other, and it seems like something's really starting to develop between them, and then Max just leaves, just kind of disappears, doesn't really explain anything or say goodbye. And then this takes place over the course of a year, where there's a couple more times where they happen to bump into each other, and a lot of the story isn't them really being together, just kind of figuring out, is this even something we should be pursuing? We learn about Josie's pretty early on. You don't exactly know what's going on with Max or why he's also hesitant to just take the plunge and let the relationship happen and see where it goes. So while I would say the ending is kind of hopeful, it's definitely very bittersweet. There's not a happily ever after in this one, so if you're looking for a really warm, uplifting story, this is not going to be the one for you. But for me, this was much more up my alley than pretty much all of the other romances I read this week, which really just tells me that romance isn't what I should be looking for. If romance happens to be in the story and it's just something that I'm interested in as a whole, I don't mind it so much, but when romance is the entire story, it's just tends to not work out for me. It's just not what I'm interested in story-wise. Let me know if you've read any of these and liked them more than I did. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time where we will not be talking about romance books. I hope you're having a great day. Bye.